former minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, A Baha'i Perspective on Prophecy, Part 3, with Eileen Maddocks.
Good evening, everyone. This is Wade Franson. I'm the host of Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society. This is episode 99, an auspicious number. And I don't know if you can hear in the background, a tornado warning keeps going off here. I'm in a basement studio, so I assume I'm relatively well protected should that occur. Interesting times, but episode 99, and we have a returning guest, Eileen Maddocks, who has just published the third volume in her amazing trilogy, The Coming of the Glory. I have a copy of it right here. We're going to be talking about this trilogy. We're going to be talking about it directly with Eileen Maddocks. I'll read a quick blurb on it. The much-awaited Volume 3 starts with the factors of various schools of biblical criticism and the development of archaeology in the Holy Land. From trying to prove the Bible to searching for evidence of the development of the Israelite history. The history of the indigenous Canaanite people is reviewed, and the centuries-long Hebrew struggle against their polytheistic practices. Would monolatry, which is the recognition of other gods and the one Hebrew God, or monotheism triumph? The conquest of Jerusalem by the Babylonians and the exile brought turbulence and deep sorrow to the Israelites. But God had a plan for his people. A lot of ground is covered in this trilogy, a lot of ground in the third volume. Let's jump right into it by inviting Eileen into the studio.
Hello, Wade, and thank you very much for inviting me into the studio. I'm glad to be here.
Well, you're looking somewhat more relaxed than a few weeks ago when this book was wrapping up and getting published. And I know you're also excited because it's a #1 hot new release in multiple categories.
Yes, that took my breath away. And I don't know how in the world that happened, but I'll take it. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to showcase that right here so people can see it. This is live on Amazon right now as we speak. And there it is, a little bit larger. And you see right there, #1 new release in the Baha'i category, which is wonderful and not, in a sense, terribly surprising. But it's also #1 in ecumenism and Christian theology. Let's reduce that down a little bit. There it is, featured in the #1 slot. Oops. And I won in Christian prophecy or Christian prophets, and has done very well in a lot of other categories as well. So must be very exciting and also rewarding for you to have had that success. I know the first 2 volumes are also doing well.
Yes, I'm very happy about this. I mean, oh, wow.
My daughter's cat Licorice had to come up and see what the excitement was about.
I don't know where my cats are at the moment. But anyway, it was a long, hard 10 years to put this trilogy together. And to see it come to fruition has been very exciting.
Well, and before that 10 years of work on getting this trilogy out, a lot of other things happened in your life. Let's just briefly review for our audience who may not all know you, a little bit about who Eileen is. So tell us, a little bit about your background and what led to your interest in writing these books.
Well, my background really is varied, from growing up in rural Maine to finishing high school and university in Lawrence, Kansas, married, 2 children, and then working as a paralegal and in sales. But throughout all of those years, I was a seeker. And I started with various churches, but I really couldn't find the answers that I was looking for. And other people in the churches didn't seem to have the same questions that I had. And so then I discovered the New Age movement and wandered, I will say wandered aimlessly through the New Age movement, although it had its purpose because it prepared me for the Baha'i faith, because the New Age is very metaphysical, and the metaphysical aspects of the faith didn't bother me a bit. I understood them. And then in midlife, I hit rock bottom for a number of reasons, and I was introduced to the Baha'i faith. And when I started reading about it, I think what really hit me, and believe it or not, Dawnbreakers was the first Baha'i book that I read. And no, it's not a difficult book to read and understand.
Well, you know, a lot of our audience wouldn't know what Dawnbreakers is. So share a little bit about what the book, The Dawnbreakers, is all about.
Okay, Dawnbreakers is the history of the early movement that was started by the Bab in Persia, who was the first of the two Baha'i prophets. And so
allow me to interject here, because again, some of our audience won't know anything about the Bab either, but the Bab is also known as the gate,
yes,
or the gate of God. And I've spoken on this show in past episodes about my own interest in the city that Nimrod built, Bab El, Gate of God, and the Tower of Babel, which was God saying, no, what you've done is confusion. And I believe there's a depth of richness to that story. But anyway, so the Bab, the gate, tell us a little bit about who the Bab, the gate was.
The Bab, the gate, declared his mission in 1844, which coincidentally was also the date that many Adventist and Christian Protestants were looking for the return of Jesus. Well, it was the return of the Christ that occurred in Persia that year. But what really came across to me was, as I pursued studying, was that God has been an actor throughout history for us. Now, I majored in history at the university, and of course, there was no mention of God in any of the history classes, or what any of his messengers who came to teach mankind said, and the effect that they had on the course of human history. And that's what really grabbed me. And then from there on, well, I became a Baha'i, and eventually I went to the World Center of the Baha'i Faith, which is in the global world headquarters in Haifa, Israel, to serve. And then when I came back, retired, what do I do now? I'm retired. And I was idly wondering in my mind, I wonder why no one has written a book that presents the Hebrew prophets chronologically. I couldn't find any such book. And it was impressed upon my mind, you're the one to do it. And they even gave me the title, The Coming of the Glory. So I had my marching orders for my retirement. And
well, when you said they, who was the they that gave you those marching orders?
Well, it was someone who was not me. It was an entity or an energy that just impressed this message in my mind.
So going back to your New Age roots, the universe impressed upon you.
Yeah, the universe, maybe the Holy Spirit. I don't know. I don't make any claims. All I know was I was given my job assignment, and now I have fulfilled it. And I hope I do get some brownie points in heaven when I do cross over. You've lost the audio.
Oh, I'm sorry. I put it on mute because the cat was like very intrigued with the microphone and purring into it and meowing into it. So I was going to say you're already getting some brownie points in terms of readers and rankings on Amazon. So that's exciting. So I want to now go ahead and conclude this segment with a word from our sponsor. This is your publisher's book trailer, Something or Other Publishing. So let's go ahead and play that and let the audience know that they should be participating with robust energy because a copy of your book will be given away. And if they haven't gotten the the first one and they'd rather have that one, we'll give them either the new one or the first one or the second, whichever one they want. But let's go ahead and play that. And when we right after this video, we'll be right back with some probing questions into what this book is really all about, what this trilogy is really all about. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Ancient tapestry of Israel's prophetic legacy with the Coming of the Glory book series. Volume 1 unveils the foundational pillars of Israel's history, from the patriarch Abraham to the prophetic mantle carried by Elijah. Volume 2 immerses you in a world of turmoil and revelation, where prophets like Jonah, Amos, Isaiah, and Jeremiah stand as beacons of courage. Volume 3 delves deep into the tapestry of biblical exploration, weaving threads of insight into the enduring struggle between belief systems. Experience the triumphs and trials of the Israelite, from exile to restoration, guided by prophets and divine intervention. Embark on a quest of discovery and revelation with the Coming of the Glory series, a harmonious blend of history and prophecy. Secure your copy today.
And for those who don't want to wait or don't want to risk not getting it, there's the QR code. You can just use your mobile device to in camera to scan that and order it directly off Amazon. There's also a $2.99 Kindle version, $2.99 Kindle version in honor and celebration of your bestseller status, available on Amazon. So that's definitely the time. You can download that Kindle version right now and begin reading right after this show. So, so Eileen, what is your book? What is your trilogy about? And before we even go there, you had written a prior book with the interesting title 1844 Convergence in Prophecy. I think that's really the if your work is like J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, then 1844 must be The Hobbit.
Well, yes, because there was a man named William Miller who inadvertently started the Millerite movement in northern United States and southeastern Canada. And by reading the Bible very carefully, especially the prophecies of Daniel, and especially the one about the 2,300 years, he very accurately came to the date of 1844 as the return. Now, the interesting thing is Christians have always been looking for the return of Jesus, or Jesus Christ. He said he would return. And Muslims have always been looking for the return of the person they call the 12th Imam, also to occur in 1844. Well, and yes, it's Daniel 8:14. That was the verse from Daniel that really caught all this attention. So a tremendous movement did develop expecting Jesus to return in 1844. Well, when it didn't happen, It was called the Great Disappointment, but a lot of evangelical churches came out of that movement who still do expect the return of Jesus, literally. But William Miller was not wrong. He had the correct date. He simply had the wrong continent. As a Baha'i, I believe that the Christ returned in the figure of the gate in 1844 in Persia, and he was known as the promised one in Persia. And I've always had a soft spot in my heart for William Miller because he suffered terribly with the Great Disappointment. He apologized for any errors that he may have made, but he never lost faith. And he had a tremendous dream a year or two before his death, where he was shown that he had actually introduced something far, far greater than he could have realized. So that was the purpose of my writing that book, 1844. So it's actually those 4 books, yes.
So the Coming of the Glory trilogy then starts out, is it pretty much chronological in the way that it goes through the various Hebrew prophets?
Yes, it is totally chronological in order, starting with animism back 8,000 BC and working the way forward to the Holy Land. It's parallel, it's chronological with 2 railroad tracks. One is the prophets, the emphasis is on the prophets, but the second emphasis, just as important, is the history of the Israelite people. And so I have put the prophets within the context of the Israelite society that they lived in at that time and what was going on. And so anybody who reads this trilogy can really get an excellent understanding of Israelite history and the prophets, because I've done most of the hard work for you.
So the third volume then, I think you had a couple of passages that you wanted to read. Do you want to maybe go ahead and dive into that, or are there some other things you'd like to share about it before we get into that?
Well, I would say a couple things first, and then I will dive into 2nd Isaiah. Depending on how you count the Hebrew prophets, there are over 20 of them, although according to the Bible there are 16. But some of them, like Isaiah, are Isaiah 1, Isaiah 2, Isaiah 3, and the same thing with Zechariah. But the most interesting thing I discovered was that every single one of the Hebrew prophets, starting with Balaam, you remember Balaam and his donkey. The donkey doesn't matter, Balaam does. But every one of the Hebrew prophets foretold the coming of the glory. Now, glory is the name for Baha'u'llah, which translates from Arabic, glory of God. Now, the Hebrew prophets also foretold the coming of Jesus. And never, never, never would I take that away. Not that I could, of course, but they also foretold the coming of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, every one of them. So then I have this.
Let me slow you down just a little bit there and say, the disciples of Jesus, or the people of Jesus' day, and some of the disciples had trouble figuring out who he was when he came, right?
Yes.
I mean, do you recall the passage, who do men say that I am? And some say this, and some say that, some say Elijah, some
Mm-hmm.
say, and who do you say I am? And Peter's answer was not necessarily derivative of any specific one prophecy, interestingly enough. So the point I'm making here is that there was confusion about Jesus during his first coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I attribute a lot of that confusion to the fact that of what you're addressing right now, which is that the Hebrew prophets, which is what the people in Jesus' day had and the disciples of Jesus had, they had all these prophecies. But the prophecies referred to Jesus at his first coming, Jesus at his second coming, and things beyond Jesus's second coming as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you have these different things, and only in hindsight does it really become clear.
That is so true. And what was on the tip of my tongue to say is when you read it all in hindsight, you see this tremendous tableau called the plan of God with a capital P. God has had a plan for humanity on earth for eons of time. Now, in the mind of God, there is no past, present, or future. That's why what we call prophecy, and we think, who can know the future? Well, God knows what we call the future, history in advance, and all of that. Anyway, the important thing to understand is God has had, will always have a plan for humanity. And that's really what has come out of my books. And that finally, surprisingly, as the author, I had been asking myself, well, why am I doing this? Except that I was told to do it, and I love doing it, but what's the real purpose? And it was only after I had just about finished volume 3, if you can imagine it, that I suddenly realized once I can share that this is the plan of God that he mapped out in advance, past, present, and future, then we can understand the enormity of the plan that he has for us today.
So we also are at a point in time today, right? So in the grand scheme of prophetic unveiling, what point of time are we in today?
Well, we are in theologically speaking, what has traditionally been called the end times. Now, there's a lot of controversy about the translation of this. Did it mean the end, literally, or the end of an era, ERA? And it seems a lot more likely that we have reached the end of an era in 1844 and are now in a new one. But the changeover takes a long time. We are in the end times. You go to Matthew 24, and Jesus was so graphic in what he explained how these days would be. And not having an encyclopedic memory, I can't quote that, but I'm sure everyone is familiar with Matthew 24, when his disciples asked him, what's this all about, primarily? And he explained it to them about what the end times would be like, and we are in them now. And if you're aware of what's going on in the world and in this country, and I'm not getting into any politics, a lot of is disintegrating, and a lot of what used to be called wrong or even evil is now being gradually accepted, like the frog warming up in the pan and boiling to death. It's a long process. We're in the thick of it now. And it's not going to get any better. It's only going to get worse until humanity comes to its knees and recognizes God. Now, I did not say recognize the Baha'i faith. I said recognize God.
Well, that's an important distinction. And so for the audience that doesn't know maybe that much about the Baha'i faith, you're not writing these works and this trilogies to try to proselytize or convert.
No.
You're sharing a perspective that hopefully will lead people to go back to the Bible, read it with fresh
Yes.
eyes.
Yes.
You know, get serious about the fact that God is active in
Yes.
world affairs. He is actively working out his greater plan and purpose. And that can inspire each of us to dive in and take our own individual purpose more seriously.
Absolutely.
Just like you did in that you took seriously that you needed to write this trilogy.
Well, it's all back to the end times. It's all a bottom up course of action. It starts with every individual and the decisions that every individual makes every day, and the prayers that every individual offers every day. It isn't going to end top down. The government doesn't have the solutions. None of our institutions have the solution. It's every heart, every individual, and like-minded, spiritually minded people coming together to help each other and to help create the spiritual energy to uplift our society where we're living in.
Well, we've all seen that sort of coexist bumper sticker with the different symbols from the different religions. In the current climate, I recently saw one that had X'd out the Star of David as though they don't have a right to coexist with us today. I'm not either getting into politics, but this is the world we live in. Now, the Baha'i faith takes the idea of tolerance and coexistence. Would you agree that the Baha'i faith takes the idea of tolerance and coexistence one step further in that it elevates each of the individual religions, doesn't just call us to tolerate or coexist? How would you describe what the Baha'i faith calls us to when it comes to the interfaith or coexistence movement, if you will?
Yes, well, from the Baha'i perspective, we recognize that God has sent many prophets of God. Abraham and Moses were two of them, and we owe them a tremendous debt. It was Abraham who made the covenant of monotheism. You will be my people and I will be your God. Singular. Moses, who not only brought the 10 Commandments, but 3 very lengthy spiritual codes of conduct. He was the divine lawgiver. And then, of course,
what are those 3 codes of conduct? We'll come back to let you finish this, but I'm now curious. I've not heard it expressed that way before.
Well, is in the book of Exodus. It's right after the
Oh, so Exodus 20. Are you talking about the two separate declarations of the Ten Commandments, for example?
no.
Okay,
The first code, and I don't have an encyclopedic memory, and I
sure.
can't look it up at the moment.
Sorry to
But,
put you on the spot.
yeah. uh, the first code came right after he delivered the Ten Commandments. Then you go to the book of Leviticus, and there is another code, which is very lengthy, that I have been through. And it's, you must do this and you must not do that. I mean, a very strong moral code. Then you go to the book of Deuteronomy, and there is another code. And Moses was the lawgiver. This was the foundation of Western civilization. I don't know how anybody can say, oh, the Bible isn't relevant today. We're beyond that. The Bible, Moses, Jesus, they are all about who we are today and where we have come from. In fact, people have a bad habit of dismissing the Hebrew Bible by saying, oh, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Nonsense. Well, I just did a long program on that nonsense, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, which came from the Hammurabi Code, and I named the program Law and Order. And I read 280 lines of the Hammurabi Code, and it is bloody, especially with mutilating people for various crimes. And then I went to all three of Moses' codes, and there was very, very little of that. And in fact, there was no instance of mutilation to be found in the Hebrew Bible that I could find.
Well, and let me cap this up because I want to get back to the question of the Baha'i faith and coexistence. But just to summarize, one has to put it in historical time context,
Yes.
and one should not look back from the vantage point of a more progressive understanding, a more complete understanding, a maturing, a growth, and evolution. I mean, for heaven's sake, if we haven't gotten better in 2,000 years, then what are we doing, right? If we don't have the ability to look back 2,000 years ago and see some improvement, then pray tell, who do we think we are, right? And if we do have the ability to look back, we should recognize we're standing on the shoulders of giants, not belittle them because we have a higher vantage point.
Well, I would say we really don't have a higher vantage point. In terms of time, we do. But in terms of consciousness, I don't know. I'm really taken back with some of the stuff that's coming out in our society. That, don't get me started, Wade. I'm not going to go there.
No. But let's just say that there was this certain image in the book of Daniel, and the head and shoulders were of gold, right?
Yes.
And then silver, and then bronze, and it gets progressively worse. And at the end,
Yes.
you've got feet of iron and clay.
Yes. And we're just coming out of that. But you look at all the wars that are going on now, serious wars and tremendous atrocities. I just shake my head. And as an individual, and well, I've already said it, we need to link up with like-minded spiritual people who are also concerned and do what we can in our own backyard.
Well, that's a nice segue back into concluding it. So how does the Baha'i faith view the role and responsibility of the multiple religions that do coexist. But what is the higher self of all of us together?
Okay. The higher self of all of us together is being faithful to the spiritual teachings of the prophet of God whom we follow. In this country, primarily Jesus, but also I think it's recognizing from a Baha'i viewpoint that all of the prophets of God, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, Baha'u'llah,
Buddha and Krishna.
And Krishna and Zoroaster. And there were two levels that each one of them had. All of them were on the very same level as far as their own spirituality went. And all of them repeated the verities of spiritual laws. But they were all limited by the level of the people that they came to teach. I mean, didn't Jesus say, there is so much more that I could tell you, but you could not bear it now? And he was probably, metaphorically speaking, foaming at the mouth and pawing on the ground, just screaming inside to tell her, hey, look, don't you understand? But no, they didn't, and they couldn't. So he had to put things in parables, and then later on, he would explain to his disciples what those parables meant and so forth. And that is the same with all of the prophets of God. Let's just say that none of them spill all the beans, because they can't. We're not ready for it.
Amen. So we're going to do a quick commercial break, and one of our sponsors, the Interfaith Library. Sorry, I almost went there too soon. Welcomes contributions from all the religions and provides a showcase. So we want to honor them. When we come back, we'll do those readings that you had prepared and dig into your book a little bit. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We're here with Eileen Maddocks on the Created in the Image of God show, talking about the coming of the glory. While those fireworks were going off in that ad for the Interfaith Library, more alerts were coming in here about destructive 100-mile-an-hour winds and tornado warnings. Take refuge in a secure place. I'm reminded of the turbulent times in which we live in many areas of the world, and our thoughts and prayers go out to those who are in danger. Eileen, you had a couple of passages you wanted to read from your book to give people an illustration of the kind of work you do.
Yes. It's from, I'm going to read 2 pages, but skipping some of it to get right to the point. The purpose of what I'm going to be talking about is the prophecies that were given. And of course, the prophets were always warning the people about what was going to happen in their time, like the Assyrians are sitting on the border and they're going to come conquer you. But they also talked about the far future. The Babylonians are sitting on the border. They're going to come get you. But also the far future. And I'm going to go to Isaiah 2, who is not the Isaiah that we're also familiar with, but he was another prophet who wrote very much in the Isaiah tradition, and he seems to have lived in the exilic time, during the time of the exile to Babylon. Comfort ye, my people, saith your God. Speak ye comfortably to Jerusalem, and cry unto her that her warfare is accomplished, that her iniquity is parted, for she hath received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. Now, in Jewish and Christian theology, it's pretty much accepted that the exile was the punishment for Israel, for the Israelites not following the laws of Moses and the laws of God, and the prophets had warned them about that many, many times. Isaiah 2 continues. So actually what he's saying is, you're not going to be punished anymore. But listen to what I have to tell you now. The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God.
Well, so Eileen, I'm sorry. I want to pause before you get into this next section. I'm just thinking about this, but I feel it's necessary. So I'm also noticing some things in the chat, and which is awesome. Thank you guys for all these very interesting comments. A lot of good comments. And I also am listening to some of the things that you've presented, such as that there's a second Isaiah, and obviously you're not saying certain things dogmatically. It's the current perspective. It's how it's been viewed and understood and interpreted based on scholarship and history. But the idea that the punishment on the Jews was accomplished through the exile. There are alternative ways of viewing that. I'll just share one, which is that in Leviticus we have the so-called 7 times prophecy, which has been interpreted as 2,520 years of punishment. We also have other passages that talk about the times of the Gentiles. It's my view, for example, that the times of the Gentiles didn't end until 1844. My personal view is synonymous with the William Miller expectation. But the Jews continued in various ways to experience tribulation.
Yes.
And they even today. So we have all these, again, different prophecies that define different periods of time over time. And with the benefit of hindsight, we can work to try to piece some of this together. But it is an art. There's some science. There's textual criticism. There's scholarship. But the jury may still be out on some of these aspects.
Well, that's what my whole trilogy is about. Giving all of these aspects. This is just one aspect according to one prophet. And the purpose that I'm coming to is that within 5 short verses, he foresaw the coming of Jesus and Baha'u'llah. So you have to read the whole trilogy to get all of the various viewpoints. I can't do it on a 60-minute show.
True.
He went on to say, every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken. Isaiah chapter 40, 1 through 5. Now, the voice that crieth in the wilderness, that of course was John the Baptist. And John the Baptist himself, this is Matthew 3, 1 through 3. In those days, John the Baptist came preaching in the wilderness of Judea and saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. This is he who has spoken of through the prophet Isaiah. A voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight the path for him. And John himself replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, I am the voice of one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord. That's John 1:23. But then we get into some more very interesting symbology. One of the awesome aspects of 2nd Isaiah is that he apparently foretold both the coming of Jesus and Baha'u'llah in verses 41 through 5. The glory of the Lord is Baha'u'llah. That's what his name translates to from Arabic. Baha, glory, Lord, Allah, Baha'u'llah. And symbolically, a new covenant exalts the valleys and lowers the hills and the mountains, which represent the terrain of men's outmoded beliefs and religious authorities who ill-serve their people. A new covenant makes the crooked straight, the crooked being idolatry, superstitions, and outmoded laws, and the straight, a new dispensation from God with spiritual teachings and laws for that day. So, in 2 pages out of close to 300, in this one book, we have examined one approach.
So tell us a little bit more about Elijah and John the Baptist, right? So we just read that John the Baptist was indeed the voice of one crying in the wilderness, but you're saying that this particular verse of Isaiah goes beyond John the Baptist, even though John the Baptist quoted it.
Yes. Well, he says he goes from the voice crying in the wilderness to talking about
and I guess what I'm getting at here, I guess what I'm getting at here is even Jesus himself said, John was Elijah. I tell you, Elijah has come, but Elijah must yet come.
So what I read has nothing to do with Elijah. That comes from Malachi. Malachi, which is a very short book and the last in the canon, mentioned the return of Elijah. And again, it's that word return that people tend to take literally. Jesus said that he would return. Well, not in my belief, not literally. It's the Christ consciousness that comes over and over.
What I'm getting at is in the words of Jesus himself. He said John came in the spirit and power of Elijah.
Yes,
so Jesus himself says that it is not a literal return of Elijah.
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
I'm pointing out that these things are not to be taken literally. That the return of Elijah was the return of the qualities associated with Elijah. And that's what the Baha'i writings say. And so Jesus was not accepted by most people because he denied being Elijah or the return of Elijah. And you see, that's a smokescreen. And sometimes I think God deliberately puts smoke screens in front of us so that we use our mind and our intelligence to move through the smoke screen to work things through. Because what God gave humanity in one word is the mind. That's where we differ from the animal kingdom. We have the mind. That means we have the ability to think and to reason and to investigate these things.
I think also there's, thank you very much. I think also there's the smoke screen, it's also a matter of, as it says in the New Testament, God gives understanding to the foolish to confound the mighty, to confound the wise, right? So there's a certain aspect of humility that goes along with using that mind.
Yes.
And even the best and brightest minds can get lost because they don't have the requisite humility that needs to go along with it. And thus the smokescreen to confound the wise, to confound the mighty.
Well, I will dare to walk right up to the fence, but not get into politics. The last few weeks, we have watched how elite students in elite colleges and universities, in my opinion, have made total fools out of themselves and have not used their mind or their intelligence to investigate Middle Eastern history, and especially the history of the Israelites, the history of the prophets, the history of modern Israel, how and why it came about. And 20 years from now, I think most of the participants in those, whatever you want to call them, demonstrations, sit-ins, oh, isn't that an ancient word? That's what we used 60 years ago in my day. I think they're going to be embarrassed and ashamed, and it's very unfortunate. It's also a learning experience.
Pride comes before a fall.
Mm.
I heard recently two quotes I'd like to share. One more humorous and lighthearted. And I have two teenagers in the house. Just prior to this, I was watching my son's first baseball game. He was into football and basketball and soccer, but now he's taking baseball. He's 13, and my daughter, I picked up from her driver's lesson to go watch my son play baseball. So I have two teenagers in the house. I love them dearly, but I recently read that God gave us teenagers for the purpose of helping us understand what it's like to create something in your image only to have it pretend that you don't exist.
And to deny that you know anything.
Well, and that's the second one, which is the sign I said, which was, go ahead and leave home now while you still know everything.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And then, yes, and then
that's what college is, right? And college is an additional cocoon, which these elite colleges have led these students to become sophomores in the sense of that meaning, which is wise fools. They're studying a lot of ideology versus fact versus truth.
Mm-hmm.
They're being indoctrinated into ideologies that cause them to not think, and they're being overprotected in that diversity of thought and opinion is no longer allowed at many universities. Rather, conformity of thought according to the teachings and the ideologies of the elite that run those institutions.
Well, this is part of the end times.
Well, so you have this
down.
So you have this incubator of sophomoric thought, wise, foolish thought, and it's completely divorced from reality. You know, I've seen signs, for example, that say, you know, queers for Palestine. And somebody said, well, that's like chickens for KFC, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Because guess what? In Palestine, they wouldn't let you live. So why are you supporting them? And this is where the utter complete cognitive dissonance
Mm-hmm.
from the outside, it makes no sense whatsoever, viewed logically and with detachment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I dare say if they were grounded in the lessons of the Bible, they wouldn't be camping out on the college lawn. That's my opinion. If they understood what the Bible
And
said.
I don't want to dismiss or diminish their cares or concerns, you know, their emotional perspectives around it, their feelings around injustices and whatnot. But justice is supposed to be blind in the sense that it
Mm-hmm.
is detached and not hypocritical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but justice isn't supposed to be blind in that sense or ignorant of the facts and just react on an emotional, you know, perspective that has no grounding in the truth of the matter.
Well, I think we're all in agreement there.
So it's, you know, I mean, I guess the point is you've written a trilogy. It's a monumental work. It's painstakingly researched. We'll go into the comments here in a minute, but I want to call out one from earlier on. Um, and this is from Lord Cole. Academic books on the Hebrew Bible do give chronological charts of the Hebrew prophets, at least the ones we know about. And of course, your book is an academic book on the Hebrew Bible in that sense, especially where he later writes, where was the other comment here? And he wasn't the only one commenting. I just noticed these two. I'm also really looking forward to a time when there is a complete Baha'i commentary on the Bible, especially the prophets, from the spiritual, historical, and eschatological perspective. Well, I think that's what you've done with the Old
Yeah,
Testament. I mean,
that's
it's not
what
the
I
entire
have.
Bible, but that's what your trilogy is.
That's what it is for the Old Testament, more respectfully known as the Hebrew Bible. Uh,
Now, do you go into the writings as well, and the you know there's the law, the prophets, and the writings? You obviously go into the law because you cover the Torah, but do you cover, you know, the books that are considered writings, such as you know, some of the history, you know, First and Second Kings,
mhm.
Esther, Job? Do you touch on those at all as well?
Yes, I do. A lot of the lesser known um, I have touched upon, not at depth. There are people like Jeremiah who got two full chapters because he was such an incredible person. And what he said was, his byword was, they would not listen. The Babylonians were right there, just waiting to come in. Jerusalem was under siege. And Jeremiah counseled the people and the king over and over again, give it up and live. They
Well,
would not.
is that relevant for our time today, you think?
Oh, heavens, yes. Well, he said they would not listen to just about everything he taught.
Yeah.
And yes, I have adopted that phrase as my motto for the times that we are in. They would not listen to common sense, to spiritual guidance. Make your own list.
Well, and I'd like to just share a quote. You and I have talked about this for the Baha'is in the audience, who may think, well, that's nice. This is a great book for, you know, non-Baha'is to be introduced to a Baha'i perspective on the Bible. But that's just one side of the coin.
Yeah.
And I think it's equally important that Abdul Baha, who is a prominent founding figure in the Baha'i faith, is quoted in the Star of the West as saying it is the religious duty of every Baha'i to know and understand the writings of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, which he
Yes.
also calls the Word of God in other quotes.
Yes. And how can we dismiss the Word of God? That, to me, is about as cognitive dissident as you can get.
Well, and speaking of the wise fools aspect, right? So, the Baha'is have an enormous privilege, a wealth of knowledge and understanding, because they've accepted Baha'u'llah to be who he claims to be. They've accepted the Bab to be who he claims to be, and they accept the Abdul Baha and his grandson Shoghi Effendi as being authoritative, and therefore there is a wealth. There are books. There's an entire library of books that are available to Baha'is who take them seriously and who study and research these books. That the
Mhm.
richness of those writing is incalculable, and yet still Abdul Baha says it's the religious duty of every Baha'i to go and read and understand these other books. So to not do so is to have a blind spot, is to have an area of ignorance, is to sometimes talk as though you know things which you do not know and do not understand.
Well, I'll just say one word of encouragement. I had never read the Bible until 10 or 11 years ago. I was raised in a liberal Protestant church. We didn't read the Bible. We didn't hear much about Jesus. I don't know what they all talked about. But when at my advanced age, 10 or 12 years ago, I sat down to read the Bible, I found it surprisingly easy to read. It's not difficult to read and understand. It is not. Find a good translation. And then with my trilogy, you've got a tremendous aid right at your fingertips to look things up, and because I take people through the more difficult parts.
Amen. So I'd like to just share a couple more quotes here, and there might be one that you find particularly good or powerful. There's when we were talking about some of the challenges of understanding mindful, shared that often hear that question in prayer when I'm worrying about something, the importance of prayer in
Yes.
understanding.
Mhm.
We, in my tradition, we used to say that, prayer is us talking to God, and then reading his word is him answering those prayers.
Mhm.
And I think that prayer puts you in the right mind to be able to listen. Swiss Miss was sharing when we were talking about all the different pieces and the different prophets, about loving the fact that things are told from different perspectives. Um, Taz Tazi was saying people have to slowly wake up.
Yes.
Paul, on the road to Damascus, had a come to Jesus moment, right? a, a vision suddenly, but for others it's slow. It's the slow peeling of the layers of the onion. It's the slow drawing back of the veils. Do you have any stories of people who have read your books and commented to you what they've done for you or for them?
Uh, yes. I had a very interesting email yesterday, actually, from another Baha'i scholar uh, who had book three and was also writing not something similar, but something in the area of biblical research, shall we say. And he gave me a really good compliment when he said he read something that I had written And I said, oh my gosh, I've got to redo a whole chapter and go into what she wrote. And we just laughed. You know, I love to connect with other scholars. Um, we don't always agree, and that's wonderful. And someday, when the time is right, someone else will go through the very same process I went through and write all this on yet a higher level, and it's all wonderful. And I have a fan out in California who writes to me quite a bit, telling me how much she's gotten out of the books. The problem is most people don't write. They think it to themselves, but they don't write to me.
Yep.
So I figure one email, there's another 50 or 100 out there, I hope.
At one point when we were talking about, not sure exactly what, we had this comment from Jet 4231. We know them by their fruits.
Mm-hmm.
There's a famous quote in the Baha'i writings, right? Let deeds, not words, be your adorning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm looking through a lot of comments back and forth from many people. I'm looking to see who else commented here. Here we have, I think, Jet making another comment. There was a good discussion about Zoroastrianism and the intersection of Zoroaster and Judah and Daniel. Although much of the Zoroastrian scriptures were lost over the years, it was not entirely erased. The predictions of a return every 1,000 years or so
Mm-hmm.
were in the Zoroastrian writings, and that correlates with what's in the Baha'i writings, correct?
Yes, it
Do you want
does.
to unpack that for our viewers or our listeners?
Well, basically, that a manifestation of God or prophet of God will come every 1,000 years to educate humanity. But sometimes it's more like 1,200 years, like between Moses and Jesus, and then only 600 years between Jesus and Muhammad. So, and then another 1,200 years up to the Bab. So it's very loose, the 1,000 years. Also, the important thing to realize is that according to the Baha'i scriptures, these messengers of God, these divine educators, have been sent to all the peoples of the world. And American natives especially have kept very good oral records of those that have come to them. And the 1,000 years doesn't have anything to do with them. So what can I say?
I do think there's an interesting correlation. A day with God is like 1,000 years. But loosely speaking, there is this discussion about this is the day, right? So the dispensations,
Yes,
cover centuries. Noah
yes.
preached for 900 years, it says. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I suppose the interpretation there would be it doesn't mean he necessarily personally lived, but his dispensation, might have been about 900 and some years.
Okay, here's a message again from Lord Cole. There is more than 1,700 years between Moses and Jesus. To the best of my reckoning, Moses came about 1,200 BC, and Jesus was born something like 0 AD, or maybe 4 years before that, who knows. So that's the 1,200 years. Now, and the reason I say that, I'm just going to go off on a quick tangent. In the Middle East, about 1,200 years ago, the Bronze Age empires, for many, many, many reasons, including climate change, collapsed. And that created a vacuum in the land of Canaan into which Moses could bring his people. I'm telling you, God has a plan. Otherwise, a large immigrant group couldn't have gone in up against the Canaanites. It wouldn't have happened. So that's why I say 1200. Now, if you're talking about Abraham, somewhere between 2200 to 1800 BC, and I go with a later date, but I have no proof. But I think it was about the later date, which would be about 1800 years between Abraham and Jesus. But Lord Cole, you have been doing very well with your comments tonight. Much appreciated. But I just couldn't let it go.
Well, there are a variety of perspectives, and we see through a glass darkly.
Oh, do we ever?
And there's plenty of room for all kinds of thought, study, research. I think the concluding remark here is that, from my perspective, we're so glad to have had you on the show to cover this vast territory and open up these questions, because it's that discussion and it's that dialogue, it's that participation in the discussion. Some questions, that we believe have been answered, it turns out they haven't been. Biblical archaeologists and others dismissed the story of the Pool of Siloam. But when we were there, because they couldn't find it and they couldn't find any evidence of it, and
Well,
something so prominent.
It was
Right.
found.
So we were there in January and visited the Pool of Siloam, and there it was, and very clearly and obviously, unmistakably, it did exist. It does exist. People didn't come in overnight and bury all that stuff under the rubble. It was uncovered, and lo and behold, the Bible was proven true once again in very slightly different place, and that helped reorient certain understanding of other things. So the puzzle pieces slowly fit together over time for those who seek and ask.
Just one last message to Lord Cole. First, please send me the attribution from Abdul Baha, where he states 1700 years between Moses and Jesus. If you could please do that. And then also, according to the stele, which I am familiar with, yes, I am familiar with that.
Yes, I've actually seen that particular stone document in Egypt personally.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, there you have it, folks. We didn't go to all of our commercial breaks because the material was so fascinating. Eileen, is there any particular comment that you want to call out here?
Well, I've been so busy thinking myself, but I think Lord Cole has made several good ones. And if we're...
He has told us he prefers not to be the one picked. He just, and we're so grateful for him to be here and contributing.
True, in substance. There are...
and if I'm mistaken, I don't want to speak for you, but please email us at info@soupllc.com, but that's my understanding.
He will teach the way he shall choose. What is the wise man? I don't know. Jet 4231 had some good comments.
I like this one too, talking about the Zoroastrian prophecies leading to Jesus.
Yeah, I did a program on that. And actually, there were signs in the heavens for all of the prophets before they came, including Abraham. So yes, this was very much respect.
Are you saying then that maybe Jet is the one we should be giving this to?
Oh, I think so.
All right, Jet. So send an email to info@soupllc.com. And I want to thank everybody that's been commenting. We really just love all of your comments. Thank you for adding that element to this live show. With that, I have one more task, which is to share with everybody who we can expect next week. Next week, same time, same place for episode 100. We have Paul Aurier. Paul Aurier has 14 years of immersive experience living and traveling throughout India. Paul was trained by one of the country's greatest spiritual masters, Sri Kaleshwar. Drawing from ancient knowledge and techniques, Paul offers insights into the power of meditation and the tools necessary for profound change. Discover how you can reimagine your life and unlock the limitless possibilities within you. Paul has founded a spiritual meditation and healing center out in Los Angeles, where he focuses on vibration and the energies created. Looking very much forward to that episode with Paul, a new and different perspective. But Eileen, thank you so much. Any last words that you'd like to leave with our audience tonight before we close up?
Just wishing everybody Godspeed in your spiritual journeys, and help all of us in these end times that we are experiencing.
And all the best to you, Eileen. We didn't even talk about the fact that you're in the process of creating how many PowerPoints for a series that you're doing, and where can people find you and follow that series?
Oh, yes, it will be on Clearwater Baha'is starting next September. You just go online to Clearwater Baha'is, get on their mailing list, which is very, very easy to do. And then in September, for about 20 weeks, I will be with Peter Terry running a Bible course, 20-hour-long PowerPoints, plus answering questions, plus Peter will bring in his academic perspective. And that will give you a real immersion into the Old Testament.
Awesome. And there's that QR code, that link. You can go to Amazon and get Eileen's, I think that her entire trilogy is right now discounted to $2.99 on Kindle. So now's the time to buy. Use that QR code or go straight there. And if you want information about ordering her books as a trilogy at a discount, or if you want to know information about her upcoming 20 lectures series, just email info@soupllc.com, which is in the chat. So Jet, remember to send us your address, and otherwise, as Eileen said, may God be with you until